There was a small window of time in gaming when it seemed that most major franchises and blockbuster titles also needed a spin-off game in another genre. Be it go-karts, dancing, party games, tennis. Okay, maybe it was mostly Nintendo with Mario, but they were not the only ones to do it. In the years since, the desire for that type of spin-off has slowly dwindled. Nowadays it's more likely that franchises choose to change their protagonists while staying within the same game space as before. And to be quite honest with you all, maybe it's time we accept the silly side of gaming and bring it back, unashamedly. This is why in today's DashFight video, we are calling back on one of our earlier videos on fighting game spin-offs, which you can check out after this one. With one caveat, we are only picking from video game titles or franchises, rather than the whole media landscape. Maybe you did not know this, but there was a Mega Man fighting game, with a sequel no less. Mega Man The Power Battle and its sequel, released in the 90s, were Capcom's take on porting its iconic and at the time overwhelmingly popular franchise to the fighting game genre. Sort of. The game was released in Japanese arcades and came to the West for home consoles nearly a decade later in 2006. Unsurprisingly, it didn't gain much traction, which is why it made it into this video. It's high time to give it another shot. The IP is still very popular and Capcom loves to cross it with pretty much every other project. Hell, there was even a Street Fighter X Mega Man game released in 2012. While we are sure Mega Man fans would rather see a new core entry for the franchise after what is 6 years and counting, maybe it would also be the best time to strike at that late 90s spin-off energy and release two games in wildly different genres. There is no denying that Metal Gear Solid has for decades been teetering on the edge of producing a fantastic fighting game. Truthfully, there are just so many angles that could be taken when coming up with an MGS entry into the genre. It's so much so that the internet has us beaten multiple times over, with fans of the series already coming up with everything from character select screens to full-on character movesets. And there is a very good reason why this idea seems so intoxicating. MGS constantly invites players to engage with its own gamification of tactical espionage action. The series knows it's a game so much, and Hideo Kojima and his team are so adept at playing with players' expectations that it really does feel like at any moment you could be in a fighting game. Oh wait, that did happen! At the end of Metal Gear Solid 4, spoilers by the way, Old Snake and Liquid Ocelot find themselves fighting on top of a submarine. Not only that, but the whole fight is presented as if it were some sort of fighting game action sequence, with the camera slowly transitioning from the traditional top-down of the series to a closer, nearly third-person view that always frames both characters on the screen. There is a lot to unpack in this nearly 20-minute sequence, but let's focus on fighting games instead. Here are another two reasons why MGS would make for a perfect spin-off. MGS bosses are iconic. All of its characters are, really. But Snake's antagonists in particular have always exuded a level of charisma and personality that fits right at home with the likes of Mr. Bison, Shang Tsung or Heihachi. Even the good guys have some eccentric sides to them like Raiden. Speaking of which, it's not like MGS is unfamiliar with knocking out a banger spin-off. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is one of Platinum Games' most incredible titles. There has to be a developer out there who can once again take the challenge of adapting this iconic franchise to a new genre. That is, if Konami ever gets bored of pachinko machines. There is this little team of developers called Team Reptile. They released a spiritual successor to Jet Set Radio, named Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. And yes, here we have to come clean. This is just asking for a Little League Blaze sequel. You caught us. But seriously, Little League Blaze, albeit not a traditional fighting game, is such an exciting game that fits squarely into the niche area of fighting games, where style by itself is a massive quality of the game. Not only that, but there is a real transposition of the principles of fighting games, that sees a move away from the straight-up contact violence and instead exerting those punchy impacts via a huge metallic ball that reaches a fraction of the speed of light. Mix-ups? You got it. Mind games? They're all here. Then look, Sega is technically releasing a new Jet Set Radio in the near future, so we think it might be a high time for those two to work together. And you know, Hideki Naganuma is still active, so if he could drop another generation-defining soundtrack, that would be great. Not asking much here. If the last section was more of a self-insert wishful thinking one, this is a brass tacks call upon Ubisoft to do something more with its largest property. Assassin's Creed was once seen as a one-hit wonder when the original made its debut in 2007. One of its defining characteristics, and something that would then evolve into an unfortunate staple of the series, was its combat, which mixed hand-to-hand combat with a number of bladed weapons. That entire area of its gameplay has now turned into a far more of an RPG-esque system of damage numbers, like you would find in every other action RPG. However, we think there is a way for Assassin's Creed to spin off its own thread of DNA and merge it with another. Released in 2021, Hellish Quart is a physics-based, 17th century themed fighting game that highlights the vicious nature of bladed combat. Now picture a sequel or a DLC to Hellish Quart exploring the same historical settings as Assassin's Creed, and leaning on Ubisoft's historical research to bring ancient arts of warfare back into the fighting game package. Alright, okay, this is technically not a video game franchise, as Game Workshop's bread and butter is tabletop experiences. But we think there's no denying that at this point, the Warhammer series has exploded well beyond its painted figures and RPG tabletop systems, into the wider digital gaming space. That expansion was mainly due to Game Workshop's willingness to give parts of its IP to passionate developers who could bring the franchise to new horizons. To the point that it's a well-known meme to say that Games Workshop will give it to anyone who asks permission. Space Marine is an amazing third-person shooter ripped straight out of the source material. Darktide is a co-op shooter that builds upon its past entries. Warhammer Total War literally presents the constant state of war in the dark fantasy universe in a perfectly absurd way. And it's not like all of its games have to be gritty, given the existence of one of the greatest spin-off games of all time, Blood Bowl. Are there a lot of challenges with creating a fighting game with its materials? Yeah, of course. For one, the size and balance of such a game would need serious consideration. You could not have Primarchs or Titans be playable and balanced, for instance. But those same challenges, we think, would lead designers and developers to some interesting solutions, perhaps ones that can be used for other fighting games in the future. At the end of the day, there are plenty of made-for-the-genre fighting games that we don't need to lean on spin-offs to entice players into the scene. But if the incentive to make them has moved away from those that existed in the late 90s and early 2000s, then maybe they are now just in time for their nostalgic cycle with cross-promotions and smaller but earnest attempts at niche games that straddle the lands of the Venn diagram between fighting games and the wider gaming sphere.